Welcome to Serial Napper, the bedtime podcast for people who fall asleep to true crime. This episode gets dark, so if you're sensitive to graphic content, maybe skip the nightcap. You've been warned. Hey everyone, my name is Nikki Young, and this is Serial Napper, the true crime podcast for naps. I'm back with another true crime story to lull you to sleep, or perhaps to give you nightmares. This is the story of Issei Sagawa, a man who killed and ate another human being, and then walked free, like not even a little slap on the wrist. He served 0 jail time. Nothing, nada. And if you're sitting there thinking, surely that can't be right, Nikki, I promise you that by the end of this episode, you'll be angrily Googling Japanese extradition laws and shaking your fists at the French justice system. Oh, and just a warning, this case involves cannibalism, necrophilia, and an absolute failure of multiple justice systems. So if that's not your vibe tonight, I totally get it. For everyone else, buckle up. In 1981, Issei Sagawa murdered a Dutch woman friend in Paris, a fellow student named Renée Hartevelt. He shot her, dismembered her, and then he ate parts of her. When he was caught, he didn't deny it. In fact, he seemed kind of proud. And yet, today, instead of rotting in prison, he's known as a minor celebrity in Japan. He's written 4 books, he had a weekly column in a tabloid, and he used to make regular appearances on TV. He even posed for Porn magazine, seriously. Journalists and so-called literary types have praised his writing. Some even call him Sagawa-kun, a cutesy nickname typically reserved for children or close friends. Let that sink in. So why was a confessed killer not only walking the streets of Tokyo, but also being celebrated in some circles? The answer is complicated and horrifying. This case speaks volumes about the cracks in international law, Japan's questionable handling of mentally disturbed criminals, and society's twisted obsession with death, violence, and perversion. So, dim the lights, put your phone down, and listen to one of the most disturbing, frustrating, and grossly unjust tales that I've ever covered. So, let's jump right in. All right, let's back it up for just a second and talk about how we got here. Because believe it or not, this wasn't just a random snap one day in Paris. The red flags started way earlier. Issei Sagawa was born on April 26, 1949 in Kobe, Japan. Yes, the same Kobe that's famous for its melt-in-your-mouth beef. Thankfully, it's still more known for that than this cannibal creep. Now, interestingly, Issei Sagawa went by the nickname Pang growing up, so I will be referring to him as Pang in this episode. And despite how his story ends, he was actually born into a pretty privileged life. His family was wealthy, old money, and well-connected. Basically, Pang was born with a silver spoon, which makes what he did even more disturbing. He was born prematurely, reportedly so tiny that he could fit in the palm of his father's hand. Which sounds kind of poetic if this was a fairy tale and not, the origin story of a future cannibal. As a baby, he developed enteritis, a disease of the small intestine, but he recovered after a series of injections. So, yeah, he was fragile from the get-go, but he survived. And if you look at photos of Pang as an adult, and don't worry, I've unfortunately seen plenty, he's very small in stature, like truly frail looking. He had a sort of delicate, sunken presence, and he knew it. Despite all of this, his childhood was reportedly good. His parents were loving and traditional, the kind who'd do anything for their kid, and they kind of did. There's no sob story here about abuse or neglect. He never claimed to be mistreated. If anything, he was overprotected. Because of his small size, his parents sheltered him, and while their intentions might have been good, it gave Pang a complex. He grew up feeling inferior, physically, emotionally, socially. He was hyper aware of just how different he was from everyone else. And that stew of insecurity, it festered. Now, here's where things start getting weird. Pang would later say that his first cannibalistic desire came in first grade. Yeah, first grade. That's when he saw a male classmate's thigh and he thought about eating it. Totally normal child behavior, right? He also claims that he and his brother used to play a cannibal game with their uncle. According to Pang, this weird little game, it stuck with him and it might have triggered some of his later urges. I don't know what kind of family game night involves fake cannibalism, but it clearly left a mark. It's also alleged that he participated in bestiality with the family dog, so he was truly disturbed from the very beginning. As he got older, talking to women was not his thing, like at all. He was awkward, insecure, and he mostly kept to himself. But he spent a lot of time fantasizing about women that he would never actually approach. And not just any women, Western women. Think Marilyn Monroe, tall, blonde, curvy, glamorous. Everything that he was not. His obsession was less about attraction and more about possession and control. So let's fast forward a little bit. In his early 20s, while living in Tokyo, Pang decided it would be a great idea to follow a tall German woman home. He had spotted her walking all by herself, and she was beautiful, blonde, just like the women he'd obsessed over for years. But Pang didn't want to ask her out or write her bad poetry. He wanted to eat her, and not in a sexual way. He broke into her apartment while she was sleeping, wearing a Frankenstein mask and carrying nothing but an umbrella. His plan, and I can't believe this was the plan, was to slice off part of her butt and then sneak away with it like a little flesh souvenir. Clearly not well thought out. Because the second he made his move, she woke up, screamed, and shoved him to the ground. She was not playing around. This woman, bless her, held her own. He was tiny and not exactly athletic. She managed to hold him there until the police arrived. Now here's the part that'll make your jaw drop. Pang was arrested, but instead of being charged for attempted whatever the hell this was, he was only charged with attempted rape. And instead of serving time, his wealthy parents paid off the victim, and the charges were dropped. Oh, but it gets worse. His parents, finally maybe our son breaking into women's homes with the intent to harvest their flesh is concerning. Well, they took him to a psychologist. The psychologist basically went, yeah, this guy is dangerous, like legit dangerous. And what did his family do with this terrifying professional opinion? Absolutely nothing. They swept it under the rug. No follow-up, no reporting, no institutionalization. Just back to business as usual. And you probably know where this is going next. Paris. If his parents had actually listened to the warning signs, taken action, maybe, just maybe, what happened next in Paris could have been prevented. But they didn't. And so, a few years later after this incident in Tokyo, Pang would do something so horrific, so stomach-turning, and so deeply unjust, and he'd still get away with it. So now we land in Paris, the city of light, love, croissants, and in this case, one of the most sickening crimes ever committed by a so-called intellectual. In 1977, when Pang was 27 years old, he packed up his bags and he moved to France to pursue a PhD in literature at the Sorbonne, one of the most prestigious universities in Paris. It was his first time living away from his parents, and without mommy and daddy hovering over him, it's like something in him unlocked. Free from supervision, Pang finally started to lean into the darkest parts of himself. And no, he didn't join a poetry club or go wild on wine and cheese. Instead, he started picking up sex workers almost every night with the full intention of killing and eating them. Yeah, every night. A living, breathing death fantasy on loop. His plan was pretty straightforward, at least in his mind. He would shoot them, then consume their flesh. So clearly he had learned something from his failed Tokyo attempt. Unfortunately for him, and thankfully for these women, he could never follow through. He'd freeze every single time. Later, he would say that his urge shifted. It became less about cannibalism and more about this all-consuming obsession. He said, quote, "It became less about wanting to eat them and more an obsession with the idea that I simply had to carry out this ritual of killing a girl no matter what." And one night, he finally did. On June 11th, 1981, Peng decided that tonight was the night. He had made up his mind, and tragically, he had already chosen his victim. Her name was Renée Hartevelt. Renée was a 25-year-old student from Holland, and Peng was completely enamored by her. She was beautiful, brilliant, and kind. The kind of woman who made everyone feel seen, even loners like Peng. Unfortunately, there is limited information publicly available about Renée, especially compared to the overwhelming coverage of Peng Issei Sagawa. But here's what we do know. She was intelligent, multilingual, and full of potential. A young woman deeply engaged in the world of ideas and culture. She was studying at the Sorbonne, one of Europe's most prestigious universities, and she spoke several languages fluently, including French, German, and English. She had a warm academic spirit, and she was said to be someone who truly enjoyed learning, especially about people from different walks of life. She didn't see the danger in Peng. To her, he was a quiet, eccentric classmate who needed a friend. She welcomed him into her life, treated him with compassion, and it was that kindness that he exploited in the worst possible way. Renée should have graduated, traveled the world, published papers, maybe taught, maybe written books of her own. Instead, her story has been overshadowed by the man who stole it. Renée and Peng were classmates, and she had taken a genuine interest in him. Maybe she even pitied him a little. She would invite him out with her friends, include him in conversations, and offer a bit of warmth that he clearly wasn't used to. And how did he repay that kindness? He invited her over for dinner under the pretense of helping him translate some poetry, a typical grad school kind of hangout. I imagine she probably thought that she was just helping out this awkward guy with his assignment. She had no idea what was coming. Renée showed up at Peng's apartment, still trusting, still kind, likely with no idea that she had already been chosen, that she had already been dehumanized in his mind, reduced to an object, a meal. He claimed that he loved her, and in his twisted logic, the best way to be close to her was to consume her. He believed that by eating her, he could absorb her energy, her youth, her beauty, all the things he felt that he lacked. It's like some kind of demented form of spiritual cannibalism. So once she was there, Renée began reading poetry aloud, sitting at a desk, her back turned to him. And that's when Peng picked up the rifle. He couldn't face her. Of course not. He was a coward. So he crept up behind her, raised the gun, and tried to pull the trigger. But it misfired. At this point, Renée had no idea what had just happened. Maybe she thought that it was a sound from outside, or maybe she noticed that something was off. We'll never know. Peng, on the other hand, he had a choice. He could have stopped. He could have let her live, but he didn't. He reloaded, took aim again, and this time he fired, shooting Renée in the neck, killing her almost instantly. And here's where it gets even more chilling. After finally committing the murder he had fantasized about for years, Peng fainted. Yeah, big man, big plans. And the second it becomes real, boom, he hits the floor. But when he woke up and realized that she was dead, the fantasy took over. The obsession fully kicked in. He was now in what he would later describe as a trance-like state, and he was ready to carry out the rest of his horrifying ritual. Everything that happens next is worse than what you're imagining, and I'm going to tell you, not because I want to, but because this is the reality of what happened to Renée Hartevelt. What Pang did to her body after death, and how the world let him walk free for it, it's something that you'll never forget. Now, I don't know if I need to put a trigger warning here because, honestly, this whole story is just absolutely disgusting. But trigger warning, I guess. Yeah, it's all bad. Pang had sex with Renée's dead corpse. Yeah, then he kissed her dead corpse and told her that he loved her. Next, he tried to eat her just as she was, a whole dead body. Of course, he couldn't bite into her skin because his teeth were not sharp enough. So he left the apartment and went to go purchase a butcher knife. Then he came home and he began to cut parts of her body into smaller pieces that he could eat. Pang ate most of her breasts and face, saving other parts in his refrigerator. He also took photographs of her at each eating stage so that he could commemorate the moment later. In an interview, he would say that his only regret was that he hadn't eaten her while she was still alive. He said, quote, "What I truly wished was to eat her living flesh. Nobody believes me, but my ultimate intention was to eat her, not necessarily to kill her." Pang had spent a total of 48 hours in his apartment with Renée's body. He then put her body parts into 2 suitcases, hailed a taxi, and told the driver to bring him to a park near a lake. He attempted to dump her body in Lake Bois du Boulogne, thinking that it was somewhat of a remote location. But thankfully, he was seen in the act and he would be arrested by French police. Actually, there was a restaurant near the lake, and people had seen this tiny man pulling 2 suitcases behind him, trying to drag them over into the lake. So there are a few different versions that I've heard about how this all went down. In one account, he was caught red-handed with the suitcases, but in another, I read that he had actually tired himself out pulling these suitcases over to the lake, and then he fell asleep, like right by the lake, I think on a tree stump. When he woke up, there were people opening the suitcases that he had dropped there, so he fled, but he was captured soon after. He wasn't exactly an athlete, so he wasn't getting very far. When police opened the suitcases, they found the woman's legs, her torso, and head, and observed that pieces of flesh had been cut from the parts. Because the body was so badly mutilated, they would not have been able to identify her if it were not for Pang's arrest. When he was taken into custody, he immediately came clean about what had happened. Police noted that he was small, fragile, and seemed like an unlikely suspect in such a gruesome murder. But when they searched his apartment, it was apparent what he had done, and what he had claimed to do was true. They could not believe what they had found. They opened a small refrigerator in his apartment and found a large quantity of human flesh from his victim that he was saving to eat later. They found a plate that he had used to eat pieces of his victim from, but the nail in the coffin came when Renée's ID was found in his apartment. His demeanor the entire time shocked and disturbed the police. He kept his composure as he gave them every single grueling detail of what he had done. He wasn't the typical persona of someone who would do something like this. Yet, here he was. Now, this should have been the end, right? Open and shut case. Dude literally confessed, and there were photos, a whole damn crime scene, and then the remains. Except, no. Pang remained in France while awaiting trial. But lucky for him, he came from money, and money talks. His wealthy father immediately swooped in and hired a high-powered defense lawyer to help keep his deranged son out of prison. And it worked. After being held for 2 years awaiting trial, Pang finally went before the French judge Jean-Louis Bougier, who reviewed the psychiatric evaluations and ruled that Pang was legally insane, and therefore he was unfit to stand trial. Instead of prison, he was committed to a mental institution indefinitely. While there, he underwent extensive psychological evaluations, and the results were disturbing. One report noted how fixated he was on his height. Remember, Pang was very small, reportedly around 4 feet tall, which had always fed into his inferiority complex. Psychiatrists described him as emotionally cold, self-satisfied, and totally detached when he spoke about what he had done to Renée. There was zero remorse, no shame. He spoke about murder and cannibalism like it was some casual academic project, like he was proud of it. And honestly, you'd have to be emotionally hollow to do what he did and then talk about it like it was dinner prep. But here's where it gets even weirder. While locked up in that French mental hospital, Pang's story started hitting the local press, and he quickly gained a kind of twisted celebrity status. People were weirdly intrigued by him, by his calm demeanor and his bizarre motivations, by his horrifying actions. Instead of hiding him away, the media kind of elevated him. It was creepy and surreal, and it was only just the beginning, because Daddy Dearest wasn't done yet. Not wanting French taxpayers to foot the bill for his son's mental health care, or maybe just wanting his son closer to home, Pang's father once again hired a powerful, expensive lawyer and lobbied for his son's deportation back to Japan. And the French courts, they agreed. In 1984, just 3 years after murdering and eating a woman, Pang was put on a plane to Tokyo. And this is where justice truly died. You'd think that once back in Japan, Pang would be placed in a Japanese mental institution, maybe even retried, maybe something. But no. Once he arrived, Japanese psychiatrists evaluated him and basically went, "He's fine, he's sane." Seriously, they said he was mentally competent. And since he had never officially stood trial in France, there were no formal charges to hold him on. Why? Because the French courts had dropped the charges when they deemed him unfit. And worse, the French court documents were sealed, so the Japanese authorities couldn't even access them. There was no legal framework to charge or detain him in Japan. So what happened? Well, he was released, just like that. Pang, a man who murdered, mutilated, and ate a woman, he stepped off a plane and he walked into freedom. No jail time, no hospital, no probation, nothing. He was a free man the moment he landed on Japanese soil. I mean, can you imagine? A woman is brutally murdered in one country. The killer admits to everything, and not only does he not get punished, he gets famous. Next, I'll tell you exactly what Pang did with his freedom, and I promise it's going to make your blood boil. A man kills, eats, and desecrates a woman's body, and he walks free. Not only that, he becomes a literal celebrity. In Japan, Issei Sagawa, or Pang as we've been calling him, leaned all the way into his infamy. He started writing books. He gave interviews. He even starred in movies. Yep, you heard me, movies. He posed for magazine covers. People treated him like some kind of edgy horror icon, when really he was just a sad, sick man who should have been behind bars. And yes, he profited off of his crime. He made money talking about how Renée tasted. His obsession with Renée Hartevelt wasn't just about violence. It was laced with deeply rooted racism and misogyny. In interviews, he admitted that eating a Western woman was his way of absorbing her energy, of becoming one with someone he admired. But what he really meant was that he saw Renée not as a human being, but as a symbol of whiteness, of beauty, of power that he felt he lacked. His act of cannibalism was less about hunger and more about dominance. It was the ultimate form of dehumanization, turning her into a fetished object of desire and consumption. This wasn't just a murder, it was a grotesque expression of how misogyny and racial fetishism can manifest in the most violent, literal way possible. Now, Pang's father wasn't stupid. He knew that public outrage was coming. You don't let your unpunished cannibal son walk the streets without expecting some kind of backlash. So he made it look like something was being done. He arranged for Pang to be admitted to Matsuzawa Hospital, a well-known psychiatric facility. The media assumed that he'd be locked away for life. But spoiler, he wasn't. Psychologists at the hospital declared him legally sane and determined that his motivation wasn't madness. It was pure sexual perversion. And in Japan, that doesn't get you locked up indefinitely. It's not a crime to be twisted, only to act on it. And even though he was never formally charged. So just 18 months after arriving back in Japan, on August 12, 1986, Pang checked himself out of that hospital. Just like that. He was a free man. What happened next is truly baffling. Instead of hiding in shame, he leaned into the spotlight again. He started appearing as a guest on Japanese talk shows. He started writing opinion columns, getting booked for interviews. He published book after book after book, 19 in total, all about the murder that he had committed. His most famous one, In the Fog, is basically a blow-by-blow account of what he did to Renée. And people bought it. They ate it up, metaphorically. He even reviewed restaurants for a Japanese magazine called Spa. Like, who thought that was a good idea? In one review, he described a dish as, quote, melting in my mouth like raw tuna in a sushi restaurant. And that's the way that he also used to describe human flesh, so yeah, I hope you're not eating right now. And get this, the Rolling Stones even featured him in a song. The track's called Too Much Blood, and it's about him. He was raking it in, rich, famous, untouched by the law. Instead of prison, instead of real psychiatric care, Pang got fame, attention, a following. And Renée's family, they were re-traumatized every time he appeared on TV, every time he published another disgusting tell-all. The media's role in elevating him from murderer to minor celebrity, it's a masterclass in ethical failure, particularly in Japan during the time. Pang, or Issei Sagawa, wasn't just passively tolerated by the press. He was actively platformed. He starred in a 1992 exploitation film that loosely translates to Unfaithful Wife, Shameful Torture. He appeared in adult magazines, often in sexually charged photo spreads, with interviews that framed his crime as bizarre but intriguing, rather than the grotesque murder that it was. His cannibalism was packaged as quirky horror, something to gawk at, not something to condemn. By treating him like a twisted novelty instead of a killer, the media not only re-traumatized Renée's loved ones, but also sent a chilling message that violence, when wrapped in spectacle, sells. And yeah, I know we're talking about him right now. I get that. But the goal here isn't to sensationalize. It's to remember that behind every headline is a real person whose life was stolen. So, as always, of course, let's keep Renée at the center, not the freak who tried to make a career out of her death. The Hartevelt family chose to grieve in silence, staying mostly out of the public eye, and honestly, who could blame them? Every time her killer gave an interview, posed for a magazine, or published yet another grotesque retelling of his crime, it was another wound reopened. Their decision to remain quiet isn't weakness, it's dignity. A quiet refusal to participate in the circus that turned their daughter's brutal death into tabloid fodder. Their silence speaks louder than any headline ever could, echoing the unbearable truth that while Pang basked in the spotlight, they were left to carry their pain in the shadows for decades. Thankfully, the younger generation in Japan started to see him for what he truly was, a murderer who never faced justice. His popularity, it fizzled out eventually. His spotlight dimmed, and he faded into the background. Then in 2013, karma, or biology, finally stepped in. He suffered a cerebral infraction that left him partially paralyzed and dependent on full-time care from his brother. But he was still free. Now, there's a documentary on YouTube called The Cannibal That Walked Free, You can watch it for free, and it shows Pang walking through Shibuya Crossing, one of the busiest places in Tokyo, like it's just another day. No shame, no remorse. In the interviews there, he talks openly about his desire for human flesh, and he says he's not cured. No kidding. So what happened to Issei Sagawa, Pang? Well, in 2022, he finally died. Cause of death? Pneumonia. He was 73 years old, and he never served a single day in prison, never apologized, never showed real remorse. And Renée Hartevelt, she was 25, bright, multilingual, compassionate. She had her entire life ahead of her. She welcomed a classmate into her circle, into her life, and he took everything from her. Then the world just let him walk away. This case isn't just about a horrifying murder, it's about a total collapse of justice, about how wealth, borders, and loopholes can create monsters in plain sight. Renée deserved better, and people like Pang should never get to write the ending of their own story. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know that this one was rough, but stories like this, they have to be told, not just for the horror, but as a reminder of what we're still fighting for. Real justice, real consequences, and real protection for victims. That's it for me tonight. If you want to reach out, you can find me on Facebook at Serial Napper. You can find my audio on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. I post all of my episodes in video format over on YouTube, so go check it out. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'd love if you can give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm also on Patreon. If you'd like to get your Serial Napper episodes early and ad-free, hop on over and check out all the details at patreon.com/serialnapper. Until next time, stay safe and maybe double check who's sitting across the table from you. Bye.